from events in Europe, in particular, is a very big revenue hit. So we've had to take the tough decisions to make savings, to return to surplus in 12-13, to send that message to the world that this economy is in good shape.
All very well to send the message, but the truth is you need everything to go right to meet that surplus target. Yesterday you were talking of the storm clouds gathering over Europe. The world economy is enduring the most difficult and turbulent time since the Great Depression, is what you said. It's not going to take too much to wipe out such a very small surplus, is it?
Well, we certainly need the Europeans to get their act together, and we also do need the US to deal with its challenges. But fortunately, we are forecasting trend growth here in Australia, and of course that is a forecast which the Reserve Bank is making as well. Most private forecasters are making that forecast, and of course the IMF and the OECD and many others have made similar forecasts. So we believe our forecasts are realistic. We do have a very strong investment pipeline, and indeed investment in resources was just upgraded just yesterday from something like $430 billion to $455 billion. What we're trying to do here is to strike the right balance between keeping the budget in good shape on the one hand and supporting jobs and growth on the other.
It's a wafer-thin surplus. There's no bones about that. $1.5 billion.
It's certainly a modest surplus, Fran.
Modest to the point that if it was applied to the average household budget of $67,000 a year, your spending would have to increase just by $5 a week to push you into the red.
Fran, you could make that comment about many surpluses over the years. There's been a number of things that have happened that have come out of the blue only in the last 12 months. Take the Queensland floods. They've had a very dramatic impact on our budget. And indeed, in terms of the deficit that we're projecting for this year, what has happened here is that there has been extra provision for floods in Queensland, not just the floods this year, because we've had back-to-back disasters in Queensland over 2 summers. So, yes, it's true that things can happen.
And of course we might have more disasters. I mean, that's true. And with respect, Treasurer, if you look at the papers today, virtually nobody believes you can deliver this surplus given the world economy. And a lot of people struggle to understand why it is so crucial. Can you explain to us why it is so important?
I certainly don't accept that nobody believes that we're not going to grow by 3.25%, Fran. That is trend growth. You will find that figure is replicated not only in many of the international agencies that make judgments about our economy, such as the OECD, but it is also replicated by the Reserve Bank, and it is also replicated by many private forecasters. So I think we just have to distinguish between what you might call some of the tabloid reaction and what some of those who work on these matters are saying. We've got really 2 camps. There's a group of people out there that says it doesn't matter whether we return to surplus, and there's a group of people out there that say we should be really wielding the axe much harder than the very significant savings we've made in this budget. We've charted a middle course, and why have we charted that middle course? Because we think, first of all, this sends a very important message to the world that fiscal policy in Australia is in good nick. That's a very important message to send when you look at what is the cause of the current instability in the global economy, which is lax fiscal policy. We also believe, Fran, that having a surplus now is appropriate economically because we are still forecast to grow at trend and because we still have a very big investment pipeline. So we've charted a middle course, and some will agree, some will not agree, but what we have done is right for our country.
And if you accept it's important and appropriate, as you've just argued, I guess you have to accept too it's also going to be difficult because, just to go on again about the fragility of this surplus, the Australian dollar, it's the $1.5 billion surplus in your figures is predicated on an Aussie dollar at 101 cents to the greenback. A rise in the Australian dollar by just a few cents, and let's face it, we've seen it up to $1.10 in the last 12 months, would wipe away the surplus. Nothing you can do about that.
Well, Fran, you can make that comment about any surplus at any time delivered by anybody. There are a whole set of assumptions that are made in the forecasts. The Treasury are very conservative in the way in which they go about doing their forecasting. There's always a whole team of people that'll be out there taking pot shots at the Treasury. All I can say to you is that we have put these forecasts together in good faith. They have been done by the Treasury, who did the forecasting for this government, the forecasting for the previous government. The forecasts are very similar to what the Reserve Bank has put forward in recent times. In fact, earlier in the year, the Treasury was more conservative in its forecasts than the Reserve Bank was. So what I say to you is that this is the best possible advice given by a group of professional economists who've been paid to do it by both sides of politics over a long period of time, and in whom most people in this country have a high degree of faith.
It's 17 minutes to 8 on Breakfast. Our guest this morning is the Federal Treasurer, Wayne Swan. Treasurer, the opposition has complained of accounting gymnastics to engineer the surplus, and they point to the $1.4 billion in nation-building road and rail projects brought forward to this financial year, which inflates the deficit this year but helps to engineer a surplus after that. Would that have been achieved? Would your surplus have been achieved if you hadn't changed that around?
Well, there certainly have been some deferrals and there have been some bring forwards, and that is entirely normal in any budget process. When it comes to the acceleration of investment in infrastructure of $1.4 billion, I'm proud of that because that's important. Things are still relatively weak in what is called the non-residential construction sector. We did have the capacity to accelerate some projects, so we brought them forward. That's important. What we also brought forward as well was a prepayment in terms of flood money to Queensland, entirely legitimate. And there are also additional expenses in this year from previous floods and natural disasters around Australia. They are the sorts of things that the opposition won't tell you about when they talk about and make their allegations about how the surplus has been achieved. The fact is that these bring forwards, if you like, are unavoidable or essential, and we certainly don't apologise for them, and there is nothing abnormal about them.
What about one of the major savings measures is the one-off 2.5% efficiency dividend across the Commonwealth Public Service. Now, the CPSU says that could result in as many as 3,000 jobs going. How many public servants will lose their job?
Well, I don't believe there'll be any forced redundancies, and I don't necessarily accept those sorts of characterisations of the efficiency dividend. It's very important.
Well, it's not a magic pudding. I mean, how do you cuddle this money out?
Look, we've got to tighten our belt. We make no apologies for that. There is belt tightening going on across a range of areas, and it's very important for the public sector to be part of that. But of course, there are plenty of people who move in and out of the public service on a regular basis. What we will do, and what we have said to the public service, is that we'll make these savings, which should be targeted to the more discretionary areas.
And it'll include cuts to advertising, the Finance Minister told us yesterday. Does that mean the carbon tax ad campaign will be put on hold?
Well, we've certainly been much more prudent in this government than the previous government.
Does that mean no carbon tax ad campaign?
No. Well, what we'll have to do is provide essential information in a range of areas, but what we will do is be more prudent, certainly, than the previous government. That's important, and that area should be targeted, as should other areas in terms of legal services and so on, and consultants and the rest of it.
Okay, and
that's the Treasurer Wayne Swan speaking to Frank Kelly, and very shortly we'll be speaking to the Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey for the Coalition's take on that mini budget. Let's go to